The winner of March Madness will come from the Big 12. Here's how. It's March, is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I am Drake Toll from the number one Big 12 podcast in America, and that podcast is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making this your first listen every single day as we talk. The bracket is out. Your team may have gotten screwed, and who has the best chance to win it all out of the Big 12? Here's the first thing. I thought that we could get 10 or 11 teams in. We got 8 teams in. A record, sure, but still, I am shocked that Oklahoma got gypped. It reminds me vaguely of the Trae Young year, except there wasn't a Trae Young for Oklahoma. Like that Oklahoma team then was probably worse than the Oklahoma team now, but they had Trae Young. There's some star power here. And just that team's on the cutting room floor altogether. I thought their resume as a Big 12 team was good enough to get them in, and it didn't. Kansas State, Jerome Tang, very aggressively read you why they should have made it in. And Cincinnati, I thought, had at least a fair chance at being in consideration, but none of those teams were even on the, you just missed it. It felt like Kansas State, Cincinnati at the back end of the Big 12 didn't get a lot of respect. And it makes me think, did the committee buy into the narrative that a lot of ACC pundits were pitching that the Big 12 conference has somehow rigged net, or that analytically the Big 12 has found a loophole to be better than everybody else, which is, I think it's just so asinine. And I am seeing that in the way the league was seeded. Houston being number one, that makes a ton of sense. You should be. Iowa State winning the Big 12 tournament the way they did by beating Houston into submission and forcing them to under 50 points, unreal. And they have a better resume than North Carolina. They're still a 2 seed in the East region. And I get maybe the committee doesn't want to put 2 Big 12 teams as 1 seeds, but there are years where that happens. The COVID year, Baylor and Kansas both would have been 1 seeds. I mean, we can't, buddy. Iowa State's better than North Carolina and has a better resume. Baylor as a 3 seed is something that that's good. I believe Baylor should be a 3 seed. But Kansas as a 4 is one of those where I think, did we overvalue the Jayhawks because the front of their jersey says Kansas? Maybe we did. That's not a bad thing. If you're a Big 12 fan, you're going to want Kansas to win in the tournament. I know some of you are not sickos like I am. You're not rooting for Kansas, but 4, okay, generous for a team that's missing a good bit of. I mean, like, if Hunter Dickinson doesn't play, if Kevin McCullough is still not 100%, that's not a full Kansas team. They only had 5 players to begin with, and then a BYU at 6. But we'll get into it. Because just completely stupid for BYU to be at 6. But the reasoning is kind of out of the committee's control. Like, BYU is clearly a 5 seed. I thought they played well enough or were good enough to be a 4 seed, and I thought they should have been in Salt Lake City, which I'm pretty upset they're not. Like, you kind of got screwed here. I'll talk about that even more later. I just, 6 seed. Ooh. Texas Tech is also a 6 seed. That's a great spot for them. I was worried come like Big 12 tournament time, we're going to see them in the 8 spot. And that's where we got TCU in that 8-9 line. Texas at 7. It's like some of these brands, Kansas and Texas, namely, were put in positions that don't make a lot of sense in my brain. I thought Texas and Oklahoma were actually comparable, though Oklahoma had a much worse fall apart toward the end of the year. But to have UT as a 7 seed after they lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 tournament, it's like, why? I feel like we're rewarding them a little much. And Kansas is a 4 seed, as banged up as they've been, and they lost out to Cincinnati, a team that didn't make it to March in the Big 12 tournament. I think brands may have brought power there for a BYU at a 6 seed. Why are you so underseeded? Is the narrative being bought to an extent? TCU at 9 that the Big 12 has rigged something. I'm not sure, but I don't know if we got exactly the fair shake when it comes to March. Now, I can't complain because I do believe I have a case for every one of these teams to find a way into the national championship, to find a way into the Final Four at the very least. And let's do it. Let's go to the East right now. I mean, you want to hear for you guys who your team made March Madness, how you could win it all. For BYU, you are gifted as the 6th seed Duquesne in the first round. That's great. You got the team that 93% of people can't even pronounce. You're going to kill them. But then in round 2, and once again, you're not in Salt Lake City, where everybody kind of thought you would be. In round 2, you get Illinois. Now, BYU, the way they shoot the 3 and how the defenses come along, I'm not worried about Illinois or Morehead State. I'm actually more confident that Morehead State can beat Illinois because of how far the Illini went in the Big Ten tournament. I am I am. Remember when I told BYU to lose? You've had more rest. And I am not going to be shocked if Illinois has run out of steam a bit because of how deep they went in their conference tournament. That looks good for BYU. After that, it gets fun. You get Iowa State, most likely, unless they lose to South Dakota State or Drake or Washington State. I don't think that happens. That's the true challenge for BYU. I think every team in the Big 12 has a game where you go, oop, that's the put up or shut up. If you make it past the Sweet 16 and you're BYU and then you get like a UConn, that's tough. Like the whole East is tough. FAU, Final Four team. San Diego State, Final Four team. UConn, Final Four team, your national champion. That's one. I mentioned this, if you're a BYU fan, you've heard me say this. I said it a couple weeks ago. Like, you want to stay away from BYU, from like an FAU, from San Diego State. I know you beat San Diego State, but having Auburn right there too. And even Illinois, I know I said that BYU is going to beat Illinois, but that's sneaky. That's scary. Tough. Yeah, I want to come in and make a case today that every team in this conference can win a national championship, and here's the path. BYU, yours is tough. For Iowa State, yours is not so tough. You're in that East, but I believe Iowa State wins the East. The way they played defense against Houston, and the way they played the Big 12 tournament made me think, oh, wow. Not only are the fans going to travel and bring the juice, the defense is going to travel with the Cyclones. I'm not worried about them getting through their portion of the bracket till they get to UConn, if UConn is the one sitting right there, because I know FAU wants some sort of San Diego State. Those two, they want some sort of Final Four revenge on UConn. And maybe they'll get it. That's the hope if you're a BYU or Iowa State fan, for you to go even further and off at the Final Four. Now, I did tell you the Big 12 tournament champion cannot win March Madness, and thus Iowa State, though they are my pick to win March Madness, will not win March Madness. I can say that confidently because history, Ken Pom, conference tournament champions have taught us one thing. You got to be in the certain little realm of Ken Pom to win it all, and you can't win your conference tournament. Iowa State has failed both of those. You got to check these boxes because that's how the world of March works. We'll take you to the West now, where Arizona will be a Big 12 school pretty soon. Baylor sitting down there. That was a 3 seed, and a 3 seed with a favorable draw makes me, as a Baylor grad, fairly happy. Like, oh, wow, Clemson is the team you play in the round of 32, and I think Clemson is going to lose to New Mexico. So Baylor and Richard Pitino meet in round 2. Now, look, if Baylor gets past Colgate, I could see the Bears very easily. We've seen Arizona be fraudulent in March the last couple of years, or at least on the cusp of fraudulent, getting upset last year, and they should have lost TCU 2 years ago. I don't have to bring that up. Baylor might lose to Colgate. Colgate, white guy number 3, comes down the court and nails a 3-pointer at the buzzer from the logo. And you're like, oh, well, that's not good. Baylor's done. I think if they get past Colgate, they're going to beat a New Mexico, who I have, again, beating Clemson. I think they beat an Arizona, too. Baylor has the best shot. I don't want to say the best shot out of all the Big 12 teams, but one of the better shots to make a Sweet 16 or Elite 8 run. They would run into a North Carolina at some point, but honestly, the top side of the West is not terrible. Alabama sitting there, who lost at home to Clemson, can't get that out of my mind. Michigan State, who beat Baylor pretty badly, but they're a 9 seed. So do they get to Baylor because they have to play North Carolina in round 2? St. Mary's and Grand Canyon, one of those two teams will be gone by then. Certainly, maybe both. They play in round 1 against one another. So I think the Bears got a really good draw out of the Big 12 schools. Like BYU is the toughest. Baylor is one of the easiest, if not the easiest. For Texas, your 7 seed, they play Tennessee in round 2, and Tennessee chokes in March. It sucks. It sucks that Texas got a favorable draw themselves. They'll run into Creighton at some point, I think, and I have Creighton in my Final 4. Texas, Creighton. I don't see the Longhorns getting past them in the Midwest. I do see Kansas struggling with Samford, though Samford lost to Purdue by like 50 points. But if Kansas gets past Samford, you get either McNeese or Gonzaga, and those two teams are just a little bit too stacked for the Jayhawks, who are depleted. I'd still trust Bill Self in March, but to what extent, right? Like how much trust can I truly put in? When you only have 3 players, might not bode well. TCU and Utah State. While I like the draw of Utah State, I think TCU is going to blow Utah State out of the water, win by 15 points. I don't like you get Purdue in round 2. They're on their revenge arc. Best chance for your TCU, like maybe Purdue wants to lose again as a 1 seed. If you're TCU, the best chance you get is just being able to overpower Zach Edey, playing them the same way that Fairleigh Dickinson played Purdue last season. If TCU does that, then they got a shot, but they might run into a McNeese, so I think is going to have a Samford, 2 of those teams that people really have favored over Gonzaga and Kansas, making a run in March. For TCU, it's not the best spot to be in because you face a 1 in round 2. For Kansas, it's not the best spot because you're missing a couple of key guys. And for Texas, again, favorable because I just don't know if I trust Rick Barnes in a little revenge matchup in March. So Texas and Baylor, you both got a pretty good slate. For Texas Tech, I'd like to think that they're okay against NC State. And I would say so, though NC State's a sneaky one. You know, they're hot right now after winning the ACC tournament, sneaking into March. But then Kentucky in round 2. And everybody's sexy pick this year is Kentucky as a 3 seed. That this is the year that finally John Calipari is going to put it together again. Can I confidently say that? I don't know. I mean, like this whole St. Peter's thing, I just feel like Kentucky's been disappointing after disappointing in March. This year, will it be any different? I think Papa Isaacs and Texas Tech have a shot here. I don't hate if they get, this is like if Baylor gets past Colgate, I have them go into the Elite Eight, Sweet 16. If Texas Tech gets past NC State, I have that, but then it's Kentucky. But if Texas Tech gets past Kentucky, I see them being a legitimate threat to Marquette, who is going to make it out of the bottom portion of the South Pod. And that's your matchup. That's the one you circle. Texas Tech, Kentucky will happen in round 2. And when it does, if Texas Tech can make it past it, they're in a good place. Talk about 1 seeds that want revenge. I think Houston wants a little bit more the last couple of years. They're disappointed the way the March has shaken out in totality. Houston will blow out Longwood, and either Nebraska or Texas A&M, it won't matter. Past that, James Madison or Duke. Those 2 teams will be the ones that square off in the round of 32 in my bracket. I believe that Houston gets past Duke fairly easily by 10 points. I believe that Houston gets past James Madison, ends their Cinderella run, if that's who it is. And I just don't, like, once Kentucky and Houston get together, or Houston and Texas Tech, I think Houston is the national champion. Houston will win the national championship this year. It'll come from the Big 12. It'll be Houston. They are the ones that fit in the little Ken Palm zone, the trapezoid of death, where like the only teams that can win a national championship fit into this trapezoid. They are squarely in the trapezoid, and they are an NBA team. I still, like, if I had to go against analytics, Iowa State's my pick. But based on analytics, based on Ken Palm, based on ranking, based on bracket, Houston, you're going to win a national championship. Since 2002, every national champion, aside from one, so maybe not every, has been top 25 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. Houston, you're in that category. Houston, you are the national champions right here on Locked On Big 12. Coming up, every team, not every team, but some of these teams got screwed. Let's talk about it. Coming up, that is what we're going to do on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. Nissan's my favorite. Why? Because I drive a Nissan, and it rocks. Nissan is also a proud sponsor of Locked On Big 12. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking a team that stands out to us. The Yukon Huskies can only be described as an armada. This is the top-seeded team, as hardcore as it gets out there, so it's no wonder they've landed the top overall seed in the NCAA Tournament. They're one of the favorites to win it all, despite 4 of the 6 Power 6 conference champions standing in their way in a tough East region. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. That is shopnissanusa.com. Be like me and drive a Nissan. Today's show is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Amazon Fire TV is where I go to watch TV. The reason I love Fire TV is because I can watch YouTube. And guess what's on YouTube? Locked On Big 12, which I am privy to. And Amazon Fire TV has all kinds of in-depth analysis with amazing viewing experiences with their smart TVs, as well as free live TV. That's right. Watch the NCAA tournament. You're going to want to have a Fire TV if you want to do that. TV channels lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date with the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and a lot more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels and Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me. Learn more. Visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. BYU got screwed here. I don't think BYU is the only Big 12 team that got screwed here. I think TCU shouldn't have been. I really was lobbying, and of course I was, for TCU to be a 7 seed. There are a couple other spots, like a Texas Tech and Kentucky in round 2. I hate that. The fact that Baylor and Texas were the 2 teams that seem to have the easiest, or at least the most favorable spots in the conference. It's like, what would be like if BYU? Well, let's do that first. Let's approach the BYU one first. If BYU did not have a religious affiliation, if BYU could play on Sundays, we know they would be a 5 seed. I thought the Cougars were good enough to be a 4 seed. But the problem was all the 5 seeds in the country are playing on the Sunday slate. Either their round 1 or the weekend 1 or weekend 2 games would fall on a Sunday. And BYU cannot play on Sundays. So their seeding hurt. And the rule is kind of vaguely worded as, if a team has an extenuating circumstance, and it's basically a BYU rule, your seed can be either moved up or down to accommodate that. Will it ever be moved up? No. And in this situation, it was moved down. And now for BYU, they're not in Salt Lake City. They're not a 4 seed. They're a 6 seed. The consolation prize that the committee gave them is Duquesne in round 1. Duquesne's an 11 seed that's really a 13 or a 14 seed. They are not going to be able to keep pace with BYU. If there is a lock of all locks in the 6 versus 11 category, it is BYU. They are favored by 8 right now at FanDuel, and I'm going to win so much money by taking BYU -8. Then in round 2 against Illinois, again, I think the problem with this, they're not in Salt Lake City. I was ready for BYU, and what they did this season to be a 4 seed, to be in Salt Lake City, to have it played out where you're thinking, okay, now as the 4 seed, the 5 seed in round 2, maybe they do get a San Diego State, who I think is dangerous, but they've already beaten them once this year. Or maybe they get a 5 seed like St. Mary's, who I believe BYU would beat by double digits. Instead, you get 3 seed Illinois, because it's the 6 seed, you got to play up. Illinois, one of the best teams in the Big Ten. I've told you, my hope is that they're worn out at this point. They played too far in the Big Ten tournament. They had the wrong, Brad Underwood fails again in March. That's the goal if you're a BYU fan. They should have been a 4 seed. They were certainly a 5 seed. And I have such a reverence and respect for the religious affiliation, the commitment to faith here. And it's like, it sucks. It's like, I wish that BYU certainly had a better seed. But also, I respect that they are so committed to their, the flagship staple of the university, their faith, that they can't. And in the end, that hurt them in March. Tough. For Texas Tech, I was happy they got a 6 seed. I was worried they'd fall on the 8-9 line. But Kentucky in round 2? For TCU, facing Purdue in round 2. Now, of the 1 seeds, that is, I would rather you face Purdue than UConn. I would probably rather you face Purdue than North Carolina. But, that's tough. For Kansas, I know Stanford lost by 50 to Purdue earlier in the year, but for Kansas, you're playing a team that shoots the three-pointer at a 40% clip. That is absurd. Unbelievable. And talking about teams getting screwed, it's the ones that are outside of the bracket. Oklahoma? And I think since January 7th, they're 1-10 against tournament teams. That's pretty bad. There was a skid there at the end of the year, but the fact that Texas was rewarded a 7 seed, but Oklahoma got left out altogether. Those bodies of work are just not that far off. They're not. Then for a Kansas State, for Cincinnati, the disrespect of not being right there on the last 4 left out or first 4 out or whatever it is. The way that, Kansas State got to win in the Big 12 tournament, Cincinnati got to win in the Big 12 tournament. K-State did it against a March Madness 7 seed. Kansas did, or Cincinnati did it against Kansas, who's a 4 seed and always gets the respect, has the big Kansas brand. And I don't know, man. I don't know. I think it's so odd that ACC coaches can scream that net is this rigged thing toward the Big 12. And then the Big 12 has teams like Kansas State, who I think would have been a top 5 squad in the SEC and certainly been in March, or teams like Cincinnati, who is unbelievably good compared to what I had expected from them. And they're on the cutting room floor. I just don't know. It feels like we're punishing teams with either their seeding or where they are, or leaving them out altogether for being in a really good conference because there's this narrative that the Big 12 has rigged something. I don't think I like that. Hopefully Baylor can beat Clemson and their coach into submission in round 2 if Clemson even beats New Mexico, and I don't think they will. Coming up, who has the best chance to win it all? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. LinkedIn Talent Solutions is your place to go when you need to make a hire. I needed to make a hire. So what did I do? I went to LinkedIn Talent Solutions. The reason why is because I needed somebody helping to run some social media stuff. Like, hey, can I find somebody who's like a quasi intern to be able to run the Twitter when I can't? When I'm, I was on a 15-hour bus ride from Baton Rouge chasing the Savannah Bananas this weekend. I need some help watching the games. So LinkedIn found me a guy. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals professionals. It gives access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. They do that all while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. They know you're wearing so many hats. They want to help you get the resources to hire. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for this. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Keep in mind that terms and conditions do apply. I think Iowa State has the gumption, the best shot. Like eye test, they're the team that will win a national championship out of the Big 12. There are squads like BYU who I feel like have such a good balance from offense to defense as the season progressed. The offense came along first and the defense develops. For Baylor, the mix of young talent with old senior guys, that's something that if it clicks, they'll be fine. But that Iowa State game, you go back to that, you watch it in the Big 12 tournament, you think, man, I'm glad they lost, got a couple of days of rest, but oh, wow, Iowa State looks so good. And then you go back to Iowa State and think, are they your team that's going to win a national championship? But then I already told you that if you win the Big 12 championship, and if you're outside of Ken Palm, either in offense or defense, top 25, you can't do it. And so we've disqualified Iowa State. We've actually disqualified Baylor and BYU and TCU and Texas and everybody not named this team. Houston. Kelvin Sampson and Houston fit into the trapezoid of death, into the category of teams that can win a national championship. Since 2002, this is what I circle, and it worked for me last year. I went in, there were 5 teams, I believe, that fit the bill in 2023, and I put $20 on each of those teams, one of them being UConn. They were in the triangle, the trapezoid of doom that could win a national championship. And I just, it's so tough to argue with the analytics when it says this is what has to happen. This is where you need to be if you're going to win a national championship. You need to not win your conference tournament. That's a pretty big one. And then the other thing is you need to be in the top 25 in offense and defensive efficiency per Ken Palm. The 8 teams that are in the top 25 in both those categories are Arizona, Auburn, Connecticut, Creighton, Marquette, North Carolina, and Houston. Purdue as well is also in there. I don't know if I said them. The idea that this year is a revenge year for Purdue is one that I am buying into. I think Purdue goes on a run. The idea that this year is a revenge year for Houston, hey, you were a juggernaut last season. Can you rally and really put on a show, make it to the Final Four this year? I'm buying into that as well. They are the 2 1 seeds that I have the most confidence in. The reason being that Houston, that defense is unbelievable. Unreal, best in the country analytically. And Purdue saw the same thing with Virginia. They lose to a 16 seed, and it's just that little piece of anytime you see a narrative where you see, oh, this could be big for somebody. This could be a headline. This could make money. This could bring eyeballs to March. That thing happens a lot. Cinderella stories, redemption stories. Those arcs seem to come and go year by year in these scenarios. I think Purdue's going to fit that. And they fit it analytically, and Houston fits it analytically. And now UConn does, and Creighton does. And I'm buying in. I'm buying in on Houston being the national champion out of that category, but still Purdue having a good run in this tournament. Reluctantly, right? We haven't seen Matt Painter. We've seen him lose to the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. We've seen him lose to Fairleigh Dickinson. He's had some just really bad trips to the NCAA tournament, but I've got confidence in them, and I've got confidence in Houston. I think Houston overall wins it. And one of the main reasons why, is the South is just, to me, not that bad. Marquette's tough. Kentucky's tough. People like Kentucky to make a run this year, but Longwood, Houston beats them by 40, however much they want to. Nebraska and Texas A&M, that's laughable. Like thinking about Texas A&M and Houston being on the same court again. They've already done it once this season. It was a fairly tight game, but now at this point in the juncture, Houston wins by 15 points against Nebraska. They win by 20. Wisconsin and James Madison, Houston's defense beats them both into submission. I'm not sure if either school scores more than 50. For Duke and Vermont, that same thing applies. I think Houston is just an NBA team compared to Duke. When you put them on the floor together, Houston will dominate that matchup. Texas Tech and NC State. We've already seen that Texas Tech can play legitimate basketball at the top of one of the best conferences, the best conference in college. But I don't think they can compete with Houston if they're to meet in the NCAA tournament. NC State, same thing. Kentucky, same thing. And while Kentucky and Marquette have the best shot here, I don't think Oakland or Florida or Western Kentucky have any. Houston's going to the Final Four. This is what I'm booking right now. Houston is going to the Final Four. I believe it is Houston. I also think there's a good chance that Iowa State goes to the Final Four. Wouldn't it rock if 2 Big 12 teams got there? What if Baylor did it too? I think the Bears do have a shot. Wouldn't be shocked if like a Grand Canyon comes out. We've seen plenty of these just random teams in the Final Four, but I like a Iowa State, a North Carolina, a Houston, and a Purdue here. And if not Purdue, I'm really favoring Creighton as well. This feels like after last year was complete chaos. The Final Four was a bunch of random teams where it was everybody's high seed, and it made no sense that this year we all come back to earth. Remember the whole redemption arc thing. Like when there's a story there, that's typically what seems to play out. I think it's what plays out this year, and we see a much more chalk tournament when the dust clears and we get to the Final Four in Arizona. And so, yeah, I think that's what I'm going with today. We'll see. Maybe I'll change my mind. Don't lock me into that Final Four, but give me right now for rough one, Carolina, Iowa State, Houston, and Purdue. A very, very boring Final Four. And I just hope it's not that, but I do still think Houston, Jamal Shedd, LJ Cryer won a national championship. LJ Cryer's second national championship in college after he got that one at Baylor. And the analytics back it up. The analytics only back it up for Houston out of the Big 12. It's not me. If I had to pick, if analytics didn't exist, I would pick Iowa State all day long, especially the way the man handled Houston. But tough to argue with a thing that just happens every year, right? This has been It Always Will Be. Come back tomorrow. We're still breaking down the bracket, and also this college football playoff thing. We're not getting enough money. I don't like it. It's Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.